Hello and welcome, everyone. Today's session is a foundational one, but don't let the word introductory fool you. This is where it all begins for anyone serious about working in clinical development, medical affairs, or even field-based medical roles. Whether you're a medical science liaison, a clinical research associate, or just someone curious about how drugs make their way from a lab to a patient's bedside, this tutorial is for you. We're going to explore two major things today. First, what exactly is clinical research? And second, how did we arrive at what we now call good clinical practice, or GCP? We will also talk about the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, and the Belmont Report. So let's start by answering a very basic question, but one that's often misunderstood. So, what is clinical research? You might hear the term and think, oh, that's just drug trials? Well, yes and no. Clinical research is any study that involves human participants and is designed to answer specific questions about health, diseases, or treatments. It includes drug trials, yes, but also behavioral studies, diagnostic procedures, and even observational studies that don't involve medications at all. At its core, clinical research is about generating evidence. Evidence that tells us, is this treatment safe? Is it effective? Is it better than what we already have? Now, here's where it gets interesting. Clinical research is different from routine medical care. Think about it this way. When you go to a doctor, the goal is to treat you. But in a clinical trial, you're part of a study that may help many others in the future, even if it may or may not directly benefit you. That's why clinical research has its own ethics, its own safeguards, and yes, its own global standards, which brings us to GCP. But before we go there, let's just quickly break down the two main types of clinical research. First, we have interventional studies. These are trials where something is done to the participant. A drug, a device, a procedure. Then we have observational studies, where we don't interfere. We just observe and record outcomes in a structured way. Both types contribute to our understanding of medicine, and both require careful design, oversight, and compliance, which is exactly why the next part of today's tutorial matters so much. Let's dive into the story of how GCP came to be. Now, the phrase good clinical practice might sound like a checklist, or maybe a boring document someone asks you to sign during training. But actually, GCP has a powerful backstory, and it starts with some dark chapters in medical history. Let's rewind to the 1940s, during World War II. The Nuremberg trials exposed horrific, unethical experiments conducted on humans without their consent. That led to the Nuremberg Code in 1947, one of the earliest documents affirming the principle of informed consent. Then came the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964, issued by the World Medical Association. It laid out ethical principles for doctors doing research, reinforcing the need to protect human subjects. But things didn't stop there. Fast forward to the 1980s and 1990s. The pharmaceutical world had gone global. Trials were happening in the US, Europe, Japan, and yet every region had its own set of rules. This created a huge problem. How could you run international clinical trials when everyone had different definitions of what's acceptable practice? And that's where the International Conference on Harmonization, or ICH, comes in. In 1996, the ICH released what we now know as the ICH-GCP Guidelines, E6. It brought together the ethical principles from previous decades, combined with operational standards for running trials. Think of ICH-GCP as the global gold standard for how clinical research should be done, ethically, scientifically, and safely. It tells us how to design protocols, how to get informed consent, what documentation is required, what roles each party plays: sponsor, investigator, monitor, ethics committee. And the heart of it? It's all about protecting the rights, safety, and well-being of trial participants, while ensuring the data collected is credible and reliable. Now, you might ask, is this just for clinical operations teams? Absolutely not. Whether you're in medical affairs, safety, regulatory, or even in the field engaging with investigators, understanding GCP gives you the language, the context, and the responsibility to act in alignment with global standards. So let's recap. The previous section. Clinical research is about advancing knowledge for the benefit of current and future patients, and GCP is the framework that ensures we do that ethically, reliably, and with integrity. In our next sessions, we'll take this foundation further. We'll explore the roles and responsibilities under GCP, what investigators and sponsors are expected to do, and how audits and inspections play into compliance. But for now, here's your key takeaway. Clinical research drives the future of medicine. GCP ensures we don't lose our ethics on the way there. So, let's continue building your foundation in clinical research, one principle at a time. We've talked about what clinical research is and how GCP came to be. But we can't fully understand GCP, good clinical practice, unless we understand why it was even necessary in the first place. So let's take a step back and explore three of the most important ethical milestones in the history of human research. Because these weren't written in a vacuum, they were shaped by real-world tragedies, failures, and hard lessons that changed medical science forever. We'll start with the Nuremberg Code, move to the Declaration of Helsinki, and then wrap with the Belmont Report. The Nuremberg Code, ethics born from tragedy. Let's go back to the 1940s. The world had just witnessed some of the worst crimes against humanity during World War II. At the Nuremberg trials, Nazi doctors were prosecuted for conducting cruel and inhumane experiments on prisoners, often without anesthesia, without choice, and without any medical justification. These experiments shocked the world, and they forced the global community to ask, how do we prevent this from ever happening again? And that led to the creation of the Nuremberg Code in 1947. This wasn't just a list of rules, it was a moral compass. It laid down 10 key principles for ethical research involving human beings. And the very first principle? The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. Not optional, not conditional, essential. That means people must be told exactly what they're agreeing to. They must give consent freely, without pressure or deceit, and they have the right to withdraw at any time. You can see how this principle became the very backbone of what we now call informed consent. But it didn't stop there. The Nuremberg Code also introduced the ideas that experiments should avoid unnecessary suffering. Risks must be balanced against potential benefits. Researchers must be qualified. Participants must always come first. Sound familiar? Those ideas didn't vanish. They evolved. They became embedded in the very DNA of clinical research ethics. The Declaration of Helsinki, the physician's commitment to ethics. Fast forward to 1964. Medical research was advancing quickly, but there was a gap. We had the Nuremberg Code, but it was written in the context of war crimes. What about everyday research? What about doctors and scientists working in hospitals, universities, and clinics? That's when the World Medical Association introduced the Declaration of Helsinki. This declaration was groundbreaking because it was written by physicians, for physicians. It acknowledged that doctors weren't just healers, they were also researchers. And sometimes those roles could conflict. So the Declaration of Helsinki did three big things. It reaffirmed the importance of informed consent. It emphasized that the well-being of the research participant must always come before the interests of science or society. And it introduced the concept of independent ethical review, the idea that an outside body must evaluate the risks, benefits, and ethical soundness of every study before it begins. This is where today's ethics committees and IRBs, institutional review boards, trace their roots. And over the years, the declaration has been updated multiple times because ethics evolves with science. For example, it added rules about the use of placebos. It introduced guidance on post-trial access, making sure participants could access beneficial treatments after the study ended. And it reminded researchers of their responsibility in low and middle-income countries, where participants might be more vulnerable. So what makes the Declaration of Helsinki so enduring? It's the idea that ethical research isn't static. It's a living commitment, a promise that must be renewed every time we design a study, write a protocol, or talk to a participant. The Belmont Report, the American response to ethical failure. Now, let's move to the United States in the 1970s. And I'll be honest, this part of history is tough. For 40 years, from 1932 to 1972, the Tuskegee syphilis study took place. Hundreds of African American men were observed for the progression of syphilis, without their knowledge and without being given treatment, even after penicillin became the standard of care. The truth came out, and it shocked the world again. As a result, the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research was formed. In 1979, they issued the Belmont Report. And unlike previous declarations, the Belmont Report focused less on what to do and more on how to think about ethics in human research. It introduced 3 foundational principles that we still use today. Respect for persons. Every individual has the right to autonomy and self-determination. Those with diminished autonomy, e.g., children, cognitively impaired, deserve extra protection. Beneficence, do no harm. Maximize potential benefits, minimize risks. Researchers must act in the best interest of participants. Justice, fairness in subject selection. No group should bear more of the risks or be unfairly excluded from benefits. You'll hear these principles echoed in almost every modern regulation, SOP, and training today. From trial design to recruitment, from data sharing to compensation, these are the ethical questions we're always asking. Are we respecting autonomy? Are we acting in the participant's best interest? Are we being fair? Tying it all together. So let's connect the dots once again. The Nuremberg Code taught us that voluntary consent is sacred. The Declaration of Helsinki reminded physicians of their ethical duty in research and created the basis for ethical review. The Belmont Report gave us the 3 core principles that every study must uphold: respect, beneficence, and justice. And together, these form the ethical foundation of good clinical practice. When we talk about ICH-GCP, we're not just talking about operational guidelines. We're talking about decades of ethical evolution, about a global consensus that human dignity, autonomy, and safety must always come first. So when you see an informed consent form, when you submit a study to an ethics committee, when you explain risks and benefits to an HCP or KOL, you're not just checking a box. You are continuing a legacy of accountability, compassion, and respect that spans nearly a century. And that's what makes GCP not just a requirement, but a responsibility. Thank you.